Hey guys, how's it going? It's your boy M.K.S here, back here with another video. I suppose technically I could have part 2 of what I was talking about earlier, but could have done them in part 1 and 2 and then part 3. But on that note, I'm hoping to cover, I thought what I'd do, I wasn't quite sure whether I should just cover it in one video or over 3, but or 2 or 3, but I think I'll cover it over 3 videos hopefully. So the first one was about how I hope for Italy to benefit, specifically in football in particular, with trade deals with Africa, in exchange for trade deals and things like that. And this one is going to be obviously more what African countries can hopefully benefit. I say Africa in speech marks because I mean all of Africa, and maybe the AU. On that note, I think do a lot more to. I think the AU should do a lot more to talk about Pan-Africanism and things like that. So I think the AU should, the African Union that is, should work on Pan-Africanism, hashtag Pan-Africanism and that kind of thing, and talk about education, training, support in STEM, business, and all sorts of ways making peace and unity across African nations on that note. So I think if the AU itself in the future perhaps hosted even more events between countries like Italy, or in Italy's case, I would love it to be specifically where Italy would benefit in football in return for trade deals and things like that. Although many Italians, including the Italian government themselves, Giorgia Meloni and others, if I pronounce her name right, might have a different sort of view. But I would love for Italian politicians, councillors, the FIGC, which is the Italian FA, and the people who run football generally, from the grassroots all the way to Serie A, and those who sponsor and organise and run those sorts, each league and things like that. Sorry, I jumped from point to point, I know. But anyway, so this one is mainly about how I hope for African countries, Africa. Again, I put it in speech marks because a lot of people say Africa is not just one country, which is fair enough. But I hope they'll operate almost like one country with one voice, even though I know it's a continent of 55 or 54 countries. I think it was 54, and then 1 or 2 became more independent. But on that note, as I say, I'd love to see, going back to my point, I'd love to see African countries unite together more. So I'll say the first one was about how I hope Italy will benefit from football, like through having more skills, coming in and bringing their skills in football and helping to build pitches, stadiums / stadia, whichever one you want to call it, whatever the correct term is or whatever, and academies and things like that. But in this one, it's more how African countries could benefit. So one thing I think they could do is, I think the African Union could have more bases in Central Africa symbolically. The reason why I say Central Africa is because I'll say symbolically because it's right in the center, I imagine. So I think also the country Central Africa, the name Central Africa, symbolically, as I say, if that's the right way of putting it, I think would be pretty cool to unite African countries. And the other thing is Central Africa has its own divisions and problems, just like many other parts of Africa. So I think it would be cool to see them unite together with each other, and also help the whole continent to unite. So I'd love to see the African Union have centres and bases in Central Africa which can talk about uniting Africa together, having peace, and that sort of thing, which will encourage more tourism and things like that. Another thing is, I think whenever any nation does trade with African countries, I think again they could work together as one bloc, acting as if they're one nation in a way. I mean, many of the borders have been made by Britain, or especially, well, I think it was Britain and possibly other European nations, but especially Britain, if not solely Britain, that divided, that made these nations, these different borders and areas, which became nations, which some would argue divided each other. So I know a lot of people say, for politically correct reasons, they don't want Africa as a whole bloc, or call Africa a country. If you're being pedantic about it, hence why I put Africa in speech marks. But I think it'd be cool if they worked as one nation, as one bloc, and any nation that trades with Africa, I think they should say, in return for having access to our minerals, resources, and things like that, generally, as you're going to benefit from those things, you should offer to train up as many Africans as possible in STEM, science, tech, engineering, and maths, obviously that would include Italy, as well as China, Russia, India, America, nations, including the EU, even as a block of nations that want to trade with Africa. I think they should say which one of you are going to offer the most training for our young people, especially, which will create more jobs. I would say the trade deal I'd love to see them have with Italy is so they could say, we will help you to curb illegal immigration as much as possible. If we can't stop it completely, we'll try and, even if we can't stop or prevent it fully and completely, we'll try and limit it as much as possible. And they could also cooperate on things like tackling terrorism and things like reducing crime more generally, I think, hopefully. And it'd be cool if Italy could offer like funding for people in technology and in business and other areas which would benefit African countries, all 54 or 55 of them, and also possibly make an apology for historical empire colonialism, and even if Italy had any role in like slavery in history or anything like that, I don't really know the role Italy played, if any, in slavery, to be honest. I know they did colonize, or at least attempt to colonize quite a few African countries, Ethiopia, Tunisia, Eritrea, and others. So maybe they could be a bit cheeky and help to build stadiums and things like that in those countries, and have a mutual benefit, which would be a kind of cheeky way, and perhaps an unfair way for Italian football to benefit. A bit of a bias of mine. So I hope African countries will benefit if they work together, especially with the AU, helping them to have Pan-Africanism, especially in Central Africa. And I hope Central Africa, South Africa, and all the rest of Africa, from the south, east, west, north, and basically all of Africa, all 54 or 55 countries, as I say, will benefit by Italy helping them to unite and helping to fundraise for those nations, maybe even, as they have an apology for any roles that they had in slavery or certainly in colonialism, empire, Roman Empire, and things like that. Although I know in law, a lot of countries don't want to apologise for those things because that opens the door for reparations. But maybe they could be cheeky, as I say, with those reparations, and at least spend some of that money on having football pitches and that kind of thing, stadiums / stadia, academies, and that kind of thing in those countries as well. But hopefully, it will still benefit Italian football. But also, I hope they'll help with training in business, technology, and things like that. So maybe even like Italians who are good at business, technology, or whatever can go and mentor and teach in African countries, and in return, Africans can go and help Italian football and practice together and support Italian teams. Another thing on that note is I hope that maybe they could deal with that African nations could also, I think what they should ask for, I suppose, is this could also be like what they should ask for. So as a fan of Italian football, I would love to see Italian football teams, or those in, say, as someone who only supports Italy in and for football. But from African countries, they could say, if you give us increased trade deals, let's say an apology for colonialism and things like that, and even helping to build football pitches and academies in return for supporting Italian football and supporting Italian football as fans and Africans following Serie A and Italian football generally, and also training together and things like that. And also, I think I covered all those points. So I can't really think of much else that they could benefit from, as I say, increased training, funding for businesses, training together, improving each other's in football, and also Italy tackling racism and prejudice against Africans, and also a safer passage for Africans migrating. If they sort of make sure there's a legal and safe passage for Africans to come to Italy and be sort of monitored to make sure they come in safely, and that only the legal ones come in with legal permission from the government, especially for football. And a certain number, perhaps, that they can have agreements with African countries. And another thing is, on that note, it could prevent a brain drain in African countries. I think that so they could control the numbers, so there's not too many, which would again be a mutual benefit, because that would mean there's not too many that comes to Italy at the same time. and those that do, say, contribute in football. But at the same time, African countries, I say, can prevent a brain drain because they could ensure the ones with skills that can benefit their countries, like in technology and other areas, can stay in Africa to benefit their nations and not risk their safety at sea and things like that. But yeah, I can't really think of much else to say. I think that having more access to training and especially in tech and things like that, helping Africa to do as well as possible in tech and hopefully even lead the tech field. I have a strange sort of thing, like say I support Italian football despite being an anti-imperialist, and at the same time I would love to see African countries leading in the tech space, in the tech field, or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, preventing that brain drain with that training, so they can benefit their countries. And again, people with skills in tech from Italy, so those who work in the tech space in Italy, in the tech field space or whatever you call it, can go and help to mentor and teach and train people in Africa. And those with skills in Africa, those with skills in football, could come to Italy. So again, that could be a trade-off. But if you disagree with any points I make, answer a call. If you have any ideas of your own that you could add to them, or anything else you want to comment, as ever, please feel free to comment. And anyone who's watching on Facebook, please check out my YouTube and vice versa. And I'm going to stop waffling. And peace and love. I am out.